When you're a Tekken player, you throw your own life away in the real world, but you throw your opponent's life away inside the game. I want to talk about throws in this video. Throws are, I should have thought of this analogy before I started recording, but I guess throws are a bit like great white sharks. They might look very dangerous and scary, but I think they are ultimately heavily misunderstood and overestimated. Or maybe throws are a little bit like dicks, because the point I'm trying to make in this video is that it's how you use them that really matters. But before we get to how I recommend that you apply throws in the game, let's talk about a way of applying throws that I really recommend that you avoid. Why is it the case that when you see an inexperienced online player trying to desperately claw their way to a win, the go-to tools always seem to be throws and big lows? Well, if you think about it, the connection between these two move categories is that they're both deliberately designed to exist near the edge, but also comfortably inside the range of human reaction speed. And so if I'm looking at my opponent's hands and I know which throw is coming, then I can, in theory, neutralize it every single time with a throw break, unless what's being applied is a true throw mix-up, but that is very rare in this game. Very few characters actually have the ability to do that. Similarly, if I'm reacting to big lows, I can usually capitalize with huge damage in the shape of a launch punish. And so think about what that does to the potential balancing of moves like this. Because they can, in theory, be neutralized every single time, you can give them incredible power and still have them be relatively well balanced. And so if I'm an inexperienced Tekken player and I run into somebody who's better than me online, who has better execution, more matchup knowledge, if I start trying to move around the screen and play all this good Tekken, then that's going to be an uphill struggle that I might ultimately lose. But if I can just paste my opponent with a snake edge at the beginning of the round, and that just happens to connect for whatever reason, maybe my opponent had a lapse of concentration, maybe they were scratching their nose, maybe there was lag, who knows, I deal a massive amount of damage and I carry it to the wall. If I'm Katarina, I can do something similar right away again. Maybe down back 3 into guaranteed damage, maybe a 1+2 throw into a full wall combo, and now the round is pretty much over. I've played an entire round of Tekken and won without having to worry about playing all this pesky, stressful Tekken, and I've essentially transferred the entire burden of playing the game onto my opponent because I've just asked 2 questions. Are you going to react to this, and are you going to react to this? And if the answer just happen to be no twice in a row, then I can beat you no matter how large the skill gap is. And I also have the benefit of this comfortable old tired excuse. These options, these cheaper options that I used, are reactable, and so it's my opponent's fault because he should have dealt with them properly, and so it's not my bad that the round turned out to be kind of poopy, you know. However, the problem with strategizing in that way is you're ultimately going to get to a level of play when most of your opponents start dealing with these reactable things most of the time. Not always. I don't think anybody's fast enough that they're successfully going to break every single throw attempt, but most of the time. And now you've destroyed your ability really to create wins. And if you had spent all that time relying on these cheaper tactics, actually learning about stuff like movement and punishment and so on, you might actually be able to compete at the rank you're now at, playing a more sort of proper and methodical version of the game. But I don't think that means that you should never rely on semi-seeable lows and throws even when you're playing at a high level, because like I mentioned earlier, they have this massive amount of potential power. Just to illustrate it for a little bit, I mean, consider the example of King using a giant swing buffered after a 1 jab near the wall. I'm not going to talk about how throw buffering works in this game because I think that's a technical video all in its own, but all you need to know is that when King is setting up his throw in this way, it's impacting at 10 frames, but because I'm blocking his 1 jab and that gives him 1 frame of frame advantage, he is effectively impacting at 9 frames. My fastest move is this 1 jab, which is 10 frames, meaning that I cannot interrupt his throw attempt here. Look, so if I block the jab and I start spamming the 1 button, I cannot interrupt the grab attempt at all. So it's a dangerous situation for me. And then just obviously I can still duck and break the throw, but in the case that I don't, what does that effectively turn the giant swing into? Well, it kind of becomes a 10 frame unblockable move that does as much damage as an entire combo. For example, imagine if this 1-1 from Katarina was turned into an unblockable move that did 55 damage. It would be the most broken thing ever in the game. But that's the kind of power you're talking about when you're not reacting to and breaking king's throw. So it can be very, very dangerous, just as an example. I also want to talk about this concept of ducking throws versus breaking them. It's a question you get sometimes, which one is preferable to go for. And it obviously depends. If you're breaking a throw, then you're not going to deal any damage. Usually what happens is there's some advantage one way or the other. There's some position shifting, but it's not very dramatic when you compare it to ducking a throw, because they're almost always highs, and then, you know, punishing with while standing launcher. You get an entire combo for doing that. Yes, you get a much, much bigger reward for predicting and ducking a throw than breaking it. However, one thing that a tip that I want to give you, something that I want you to keep in mind, is that you actually give your opponent a very powerful gift when you do that, because you give them the ability of using their throws as parts of mix-ups, which they couldn't really do before, again, unless they're like king. So what I mean is, consider, for example, Harrier stance here from Katarina. This stance I've always called a plastic mix-up stance. I don't believe that it really has true mix-up potential, because, for example, this throw right here is the only throw she has available from the stance, and it is reactable, and it's always broken with 1+2, and so the opponent has no reason to fear this throw if they trust their ability to react to and break it. But if they don't, if they are intimidated, if they don't think they're going to be able to break it on reaction, they might be incentivized to duck it instead. And if they do, that means that I can use that throw instead of a low to mix my mids, and I have safe giant mids with wall bounce properties, and all of a sudden Harrier becomes a very, very dangerous mix-up stance. And so yes, it can be very beneficial to duck a throw as opposed to break it and try and get a launch punish, but you also need to be aware that you give your opponent certain strategic advantages when you think like that. And something you hear a lot of high-level king players talk about a lot is how, because he has good throws and real throw mix-ups, he can actually compensate for his lack of good lows, because lows are what you usually use to incentivize people to duck. He can compensate for his lack of that with throws, because his throws are so dangerous, opponents are going to start ducking, and he can use that to find those ducks with mids and create effective mix-ups. So just an example of how it can also be very dangerous to go for a duck over a break when you're dealing with throws. And I think that's the main reason when you listen to high-level players, they tend to say that the proper way of dealing with a throw is a break. Now let's talk about a couple of ways of setting throws up. I mean, there are a lot of generic typical ways it's done, but in case we have new players, I mean, you see these posts and comments every day. I bought the game yesterday, you know, new players. Let's talk about just impact, speed, and typical throw mechanics, so that we have that out of the way. So if you're talking about a generic character like Katarina, almost every character has a generic 1 throw, a 2 throw, and a 1+2 throw. The 1 throw is performed with 1+3, the 2 throw with 2+4, and both of these options can be broken with any punch button. So in my case, I just always use my 1 button for that. So if I have king here, I mix him 50-50. He's going to do both his 1 throw and his 2 throw. And if I'm just spamming my 1 button, I'm going to break both throws every time. And you can see right there, those are 2 different breaks, 2 different throws, but they're option selected. The break is option selected with the same punch button. But you also have these 1+2 grabs that are usually broken with 1+2, and they deal a bit more damage and sometimes have some extra sprinkles on top. In the case of Katarina's throw, for example, she can get a full wall splat. Cosme does something similar. Fuck'em Rom does something similar, right? And Josie and so on. With generic 1 throws and 2 throws, you can extend the range by pressing forward, which is going to decrease the impact speed. So a normal throw is going to impact at 12 frames and have 2 active frames, but if you extend them with forward, you're impacting at 15, but with the same 2 active frames. And so if you're able to collect 2 frames of advantage or more, it's or 3 frames of advantage or more is even more preferable. Then you're now applying throw attempts that are completely uninterruptible, so that's potentially very dangerous. Typical throw setups that you see is, like, for example, we talked about that 1 jab into giant swing that King did earlier, especially potent because the giant swing is a 10-frame throw and much faster than generic throws. It's a benefit that this character has. Gigas' overkill is an 11-frame to impact throw, for example. But the reason this can be a dangerous way to strategize, you know, for example, hitting with a low that gives you frame advantage and then going into a throw doing a lot of one jabs to give you advantage and then going into a throw, is that what you're doing when you're applying lows and highs is you're building up your opponent's incentive to duck. And when they do, they're going to go under your throws. Another very important example is if you're in a generic mix-up situation and you decide to forgo the mix-up and apply a throw instead, the typical example that you see all the time online is Dragunov. He'll do back 1+2, which is that overhead two-hand smash where he collects advantage on block, and then he goes straight into a throw. That can obviously work if the opponent just stands there and then doesn't break the throw. However, when a generic mix-up situation is happening, the usual mix-up is always mid versus low, and the way of dealing with the low, if the low is predicted by the opponent, is ducking, right? Well, they can low parry, but they're crouching, and if they're crouching, they're going under throws, and so your opponent's attempt to deal with a generic mix-up can actually mean that they just go under your throw, and now they're going to launch you. So it can work, but it can also be very, very dangerous. A preferable way of doing this, in my opinion, is trying to find ways where you can really incentivize your opponent to just stand still and not duck. One way you can do that is with strings that have mids in them, but incentivize the opponent to block because they can capitalize with a block punish. I know that's a lot of words, but I'm going to give you a couple of examples. In the case of Katarina, you have this hop kick, which is a two-hit mid, right? If the second hit connects, it's going to be a huge launcher, deal massive damage, but it is punishable on block. So the opponent really wants to block this hop kick, and they really don't want to eat the second hit. So they're pretty much never going to swing in between these two hits, and they're definitely not going to duck either, unless they're hard reading you and they know exactly what you're up to. So what they want to do is stand there and wait and block the second hit so that they can do their punish. Well, what if you just do the first hit and then go straight into a throw? Now your opponent is locked down. They're not incentivized to duck or do anything else, but just stand there. And now their only avenue of getting out of this throw attempt is to react to and break the throw. And if they fail to do that, then the throw connects, and now you get to deal big damage. Other examples of this that you see, a classic one is Gigas. He does forward 4 1+2. That string, it's mid. The second hit is mid and punishable, but if he just does the first hit, causes hesitation in the opponent, and then goes for an overkill throw, it can be a very effective setup. Another example is Noctis. He can do 1+2, which is the big sword tornado move that he has. Cancel that with back, cancel the second hit with back. The opponent is hesitating, and then he uses that as an opportunity for a throw attempt. And so go through your move list and see if you have examples of moves like that where you can really cause a lot of hesitation in the opponent and then go for that throw attempt. I think that's a more effective way of going about it. So those are just some tips on throw strategy. I hope it was interesting enough. I was just kind of rambling and doing a stream of consciousness thing here, but it was just an idea I had earlier today. And like I said, hopefully it was interesting enough. But thank you so much for watching it. Hope it was helpful. I'll see you guys again very soon.